This is a public health emergency. This is a matter of life and death.
Our country is averaging over 1,000 deaths every day. No one is safe from this virus.
What am I going to do with 400 ventilators when I need 30,000? You pick the 26,000 people who are going to die because you only sent 400 ventilators.
In 2020, seemingly overnight, hospitals were overwhelmed with people complaining of difficulty breathing.
We are now on our 4th ICU patient in the ER. There are no hospitals that have ICU beds.
The COVID pandemic was testing the limits of how quickly doctors could diagnose who needed immediate treatment. And it was forcing painful decisions of who to send home. That's when a simple medical device took on a critical role. It's called the pulse oximeter.
We were using this device to make decisions on who was going to get those hospital beds or get that oxygen.
The pulse oximeter is a fast way to determine a patient's oxygen level. It's a small device that clips onto your finger and emits light through the skin to measure the amount of oxygen in your blood. The machines are a relatively cheap and easy way to get a very important vital sign. And during COVID, hospitals use these devices to triage patients. But it turns out that the pulse oximeter had a fatal flaw.
Just because you have a device doesn't mean it's going to give you the right information.
I kept thinking, how many people are just being sent home to die?
This is the race equation from the New England Journal of Medicine. I'm Rachel Gottbaum. In the previous episodes of this series, we investigated medical tests that use a patient's race to diagnose disease. These tests have resulted in thousands of Black patients getting misdiagnosed and some being denied disability payments. But this time, we're looking at what happens when race is key to getting a correct diagnosis. Today, we tell the story of the pulse oximeter and the deadly consequences when a critical medical test doesn't work on dark skin. Dr. Noha Abalata is the founder of Roots Community Health in Oakland, California. During COVID, she says she lost many of her patients.
In COVID, we were seeing disparities emerging very, very early, where Black people were dying at disproportionate rates. People just gone too soon.
Noha and her colleagues could see firsthand what was happening on a national scale. Black and brown people were twice as likely to die from COVID than white people, and she wanted to know why.
We were really thinking of anything. Could it be medications? Could it be something else?
Then one day in December of 2020, Noha read about a study in the New England Journal of Medicine. A group of doctors at the University of Michigan had discovered a disturbing problem. They found that the pulse oximeter wasn't giving accurate readings on their COVID patients with darker skin. In fact, the device was 3 times more likely to miss dangerously low oxygen levels in those patients.
To find out that a device that is used literally every day, basically with every patient, is flawed in a way that could harm the population that I care for and never have been told, never have that information, did feel like a devastating betrayal. I thought, surely there's going to be outrage.
Noha Abalata and her colleagues waited for that outrage, but the outrage never came. And in the meantime, her patients and their family members were dying.
I've had people telling me that's how I lost my nephew, that's how I lost my father, and they look sick and you're telling me they're fine. I started calling every doctor that I know and asking them, how could I have missed this? And I was getting the same responses from everyone. Oh my goodness, I can't believe this. This can't be right.
She decided she had to do something.
We have to sound the alarm. If this is the case, then mistakes are being made right now as we speak that could result in death.
Noha Abalata began working with local health departments in California to warn doctors about problems with the pulse oximeter. She also petitioned the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And ultimately, the agency did update its COVID guidelines, saying that the device may have suboptimal accuracy in patients with darker skin. But all across the country, as the pandemic was raging, the pulse oximeter remained the diagnostic tool to determine who got treatment at hospitals and who got sent home. At the time, Joelle Burvell was a first-year medical student at Washington State University. And like Dr. Noha Abalata, he read about the study in the New England Journal of Medicine that found Black patients with COVID were getting incorrect oxygen readings.
And I was shocked because I just recently finished my pulmonology unit, had never heard anything about this. And I kind of did what any millennial/Gen Z would do. And I took to TikTok and I made a 30-second video about it. This is a pulse oximeter. It measures your blood oxygen saturation level and also helps guide medical decision making. But studies have shown that it doesn't treat all skin color equally because of differences. Within
24 hours of posting that video, Joelle says 500,000 people had viewed it.
And I was like, wow, like, why is this blowing up? And I started scrolling through the comments, and there was doctors and nurses and PAs saying, I've used this device every single day, and I never knew this disparity existed. And then there was patients saying, I wonder if this is what happened to my loved one. Why my dad, my mom, my sister, my brother, my son was sent home and then died at home instead of actually being given the care that they needed in the hospital.
The pulse oximeter absolutely determines who lives and who dies. There's no question about that.
This is Olaseni Bello. He was in business school at Berkeley in 2021 when he came across Joelle Burvell's video on TikTok.
The point he was making in the video is the red light cannot get through darker skin.
Not too long after he saw the video, Olaseni came down with COVID. At first, he wasn't worried. He was relatively young and a retired veteran who worked out every day. But after nearly a week, he started to feel really sick.
I called a friend and I said, I need to go to the hospital. My breathing was very labored. I could barely hold myself up and I was very dehydrated. I'd been throwing up. I didn't think I would make it another night.
Olaseni arrived at the hospital and was directed to a tent in the parking lot. He was struggling to breathe as he shared his symptoms with the doctors. They quickly placed a pulse oximeter onto his finger to measure his oxygen.
The doctor actually said, you're probably just gonna have to go home and get some rest. It's like, you're not that sick. I started panicking.
Olaseni immediately remembered that video he saw on TikTok. He realized that there was a chance that the pulse oximeter wasn't accurate because of his dark skin.
I remember saying explicitly, I was like, I cannot go home. I knew I'd end up either coming back in an ambulance or worse, right?
He started pleading with the doctors, telling them that the device was wrong. When that didn't work, he called his uncle, who is a doctor, and had him reason with the emergency room clinicians. Ultimately, Olaseni was admitted to the hospital.
And then I was moved shortly after that to the ICU. And because of how labored my breathing was, they wanted to intubate me.
At one point, a nurse handed him an iPad and told him to speak to his family. He wasn't sure if it would be the last time.
And I have a daughter. I was thinking, will I get to see her again? I wasn't sure I was going to survive.
Olaseni Bello was hospitalized for 8 days, and he credits his survival to Joelle Burvell's video.
He sent me a direct message and said, thanks to your video, I'm here today.
Joelle Burvell's TikTok had also gotten the attention of the FDA, and the agency invited the medical student down to Washington to talk about it. Finally, in February of 2021, after pressure from Congress, the FDA issued an alert. It warned that pulse oximeters may not give accurate oxygen readings on certain patients, such as those with poor circulation, people wearing nail polish, and patients with darker skin. But Joelle Burvell says the FDA's statement didn't go far enough.
This could have been a preventable issue. This research has been out there for decades. if when the pulse oximeter first came out, the researchers and developers should have gone back and said, let's do more testing. Let's make sure that people that are using this know that there are limitations to it. Yet that never happened. And so the implications of this is that people died.
The research Joelle is talking about goes all the way back to when the device was first invented, decades ago. The pulse oximeter revolutionized medicine by changing the way doctors could get a crucial vital sign. Before that, the only way to find out a patient's oxygen levels was by a test called a blood gas. Doctors inserted a needle into an artery, usually in the wrist, to draw blood and then have it analyzed in a lab. The whole process is painful and time-consuming. But in 1974, a scientist in Japan introduced a new device to measure oxygen. It was elegantly simple. It worked by shining light through a patient's skin, and it was pretty straightforward. Oxygen-rich blood absorbs a lot of light. Blood with less oxygen absorbs less light. By the 1980s, pulse oximeters were being used in most U.S. hospitals. And suddenly, doctors were relying on the device in real time to make critical decisions about patient care, all by using a portable, inexpensive, and pain-free test. But as revolutionary as the pulse oximeter was, researchers saw a problem from the get-go.
They immediately were noticing that the devices were performing differently in people of light skin pigment and dark skin pigment.
That's Dr. Michael Lipnick. He's a professor of anesthesia and critical care at the University of California at San Francisco. He's also a founder of the Open Oximetry Project, a global effort to test the effectiveness of the devices. He says early on it became clear that melanin was skewing the readings of the pulse oximeter because melanin also absorbs light, and the more melanin in your skin, the darker your skin tone. And that's why the device often wasn't providing accurate results in Black patients. But Michael Lipnick says no one paid too much attention to that.
The first reason was they were seeing that the devices were markedly improving their performance year over year. And so the thought was, this problem is just going to probably go away. The second was that the differences in performance between lightly pigmented individuals and darkly pigmented individuals were relatively small. The thought was, well, if we're seeing a difference of 1, 2, 3% between the pulse oximeters and what a blood gas would give you, that it was highly unlikely that there is end organ damage between those percentages.
The general consensus was that the small errors on darker skinned patients wouldn't significantly impact care. And because the pulse ox had so many advantages, doctors felt the pluses far outweighed the minuses. In other words, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. In 2013, the FDA issued a set of recommendations. The agency suggested that manufacturers include at least 2 darkly pigmented subjects in their device testing. But Michael Lipnick says those recommendations fell short.
They didn't define what dark skin meant, and you're just making the assumption that everybody who self-identifies as white or self-identifies as African American automatically has a certain color of skin. That's a wrong assumption.
The FDA doesn't actually test pulse oximeters. The agency asks the companies to vet their own products. And the companies aren't required to share that data with doctors or the public. Device manufacturers also sit on the FDA advisory board. Ultimately, there has been little federal oversight of the pulse oximeter. The FDA's 2013 guidelines are just recommendations, not binding regulation. Meanwhile, pulse oximeters sold directly to consumers have flooded the market and are now a multi-billion-dollar industry.
The consumer device market for pulse oximeters is a whole other can of worms.
These inexpensive devices can be ordered online or purchased at a local pharmacy. And most have even less oversight, or none at all. That's because they're sold as general wellness or sports products that don't fall under FDA review.
And it's very difficult for the consumer to know, did this device meet any kind of standard or is it cleared by the FDA? And your real question is, has this device been tested to work in people who look like I do?
But when the COVID pandemic hit, These problems that Michael Lipnick and other doctors had found in studies over the years became too obvious to ignore.
So many people needed oxygen. The pulse oximeter was playing this vital role. Now, clinicians, patients are using these devices to make clinical decisions at a scale that we had never seen before.
The pulse oximeter had become the screening tool that determined a COVID patient's fate. For example, a reading of 88% indicated that you needed oxygen immediately. But a reading of 90% meant you didn't. So just a couple of points could determine if you were treated in the hospital or you were sent home. And that's why relying on the pulse oximeter could be a fatal mistake.
They were never intended to be used as a diagnostic where if it's an absolute cutoff, if they're below it, send them home. Don't give them the therapy. If they're above it, give them oxygen, admit them to the hospital. They shouldn't be used like that.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'd like to call this meeting to order.
In November of 2022, responding to pressure, the FDA held a meeting with its advisory committee on Zoom.
The panel will discuss ongoing concerns that pulse oximeters may be less accurate in individuals with darker skin pigmentation.
The agency heard testimony from dozens of doctors, researchers, patients, and public health officials who said that the device was defective and needed to be fixed. And after more than 10 hours of testimony, the FDA panel agreed that changes should be made. Dr. Noha Abalata was watching that hearing, hoping that the FDA would take swift action, but it didn't.
Everyone needs to be warned. Every hospital, emergency department, because relying on this device is killing people. And none of that happened. It seemed to me that somebody needed to be held accountable.
So she decided to turn to the courts in California, a state with strong consumer protection laws.
We started by sending a letter to about a dozen pulse oximeter manufacturers and distributors, kindly asking them to fix their device or label it as to their flaws or stop selling them in California, or we would file a lawsuit.
She says most of the manufacturers ignored her letter, but a few did respond.
The ones we did hear back from basically said, no, no thanks, we're not doing anything. And so we went ahead and filed that lawsuit.
All over the country, doctors depend on the pulse oximeter, but they still don't know whether the devices they use are accurate on their patients. That's why a hospital in Chicago is doing its own investigation.
Or do you want to come in?
Yeah.
Okay, let's check this.
On a Thursday morning at Rush University Medical Center, Dr. Abea Trivedi is seeing patients in the respiratory clinic. One of her fellows brings her up to speed on a case.
So this is our 26-year-old gentleman. You last saw him around November for asthma exacerbation hospitalization with ICU stay.
You said his oxygen saturation was also 92%. So I want to get his pulse oximeter reading again.
Abea Trivedi is a pulmonologist who treats patients with severe lung disease. She uses the pulse oximeter every single day.
It's honestly one of the first vital signs that I look at. So this is someone walking into clinic, and this is someone who's almost, near death. Like in any of that range of patients, pulse oximetry is something that I'm looking at.
She says COVID was a massive wake-up call, highlighting how the device was failing her patients with darker skin.
Ultimately, we all go into this profession to do the right thing for our patients. But to admit that maybe I could have done something differently because of someone's skin color, that's a hard thing to admit.
In 2024, Dr. Trivedi and her colleagues at Rush launched a study to determine how accurate the pulse oximeters they use really are. Here's how the study works. When a patient comes in with a lung illness, doctors order an arterial blood gas. That's the blood draw from an artery in the wrist. While that's happening, 2 different pulse oximeters are placed on the patient's fingers.
And they measure the pulse oximetry while the blood gas is being drawn.
Next, they use what's called a spectrophotometer. It's a handheld device that looks like a barcode scanner you see in stores. The spectrophotometer has a small camera that sends beams of light into the patient's skin. The idea is to get an objective measure of someone's skin pigmentation to see how well or how poorly the pulse oximeter actually works in all skin tones. Dr. Trivedi's colleague, respiratory therapist Lauren Harnois, demonstrates how it works on a colleague.
So I would do his fingernail right here, and then we do this little dorsal joint area. And then the last part I would do again would be a place where it doesn't really tan, that upper arm, a place where that sun doesn't hit.
This study is being funded by Rush University Medical Center. But many doctors told us they can no longer investigate the effectiveness of pulse oximeters on darker skin. That's because federal policy has halted all funding for research involving race. Abea Trivedi says this kind of work is critical to prevent harming patients.
We can objectively look at this and figure out how accurate are these pulse oximeters in measuring oxygen levels so that we can take care of patients the right way.
Last year, the FDA finally drafted new guidelines for device manufacturers. The agency recommends increasing the number of people tested from 10 to at least 150, and that at least 25% of them have darker skin based on an objective color scale. The draft also recommends that pulse oximeters are labeled with warnings, saying that skin color may affect the device's accuracy. But it's now 2026, and those FDA guidelines have yet to be released. I asked Dr. Michael Lipnick what the holdup was.
Why hasn't it changed? It appears that priorities of the FDA have changed.
We reached out to the FDA, but they didn't respond. Even if the agency does release new guidelines, there's still no way to force the industry to comply with them. And this leaves doctors and patients relying on pulse oximeters that may be defective, both in the hospital and at home.
Even if regulatory frameworks get updated, it does not guarantee that devices that make it to market are going to all of a sudden be equitable in regards to performance according to skin pigment or be better in any way. There are too many ways to make a marginal device pass the necessary benchmarks.
Michael Lipnick wants manufacturers to make a better pulse oximeter, one that works in all patients. He also wants the FDA to go a lot further and require companies to test their products in real-world settings, like what Abea Trivedi is doing at Rush in Chicago. Currently, manufacturers test their devices almost exclusively on young and healthy people, not on older or sick patients, who most often end up in the hospital.
There's been no attempt to make the lab studies look like the clinical setting, and in fact, we allow the opposite. Things like warming the hands or having the subjects exercise to make the signal look beyond good and normal. We don't think that should be allowed.
While the crush of the pandemic is behind us, the pulse oximeter remains a fundamental part of medicine. That includes for patients living with life-threatening diseases who depend on the device to monitor their oxygen at home. Dr. Noha Abalata says they continue to be at risk.
People with emphysema, people with congestive heart failure, this is the screening tool that is used to determine if someone qualifies for home oxygen. And it's the threshold that Medicare uses to decide if they're going to pay for home oxygen. And the idea that people with darker skin tone are less likely to be able to get home oxygen and are less likely to get it paid for is egregious.
The lawsuits that Noha has filed against device manufacturers are still working their way through the courts. So far, some of the companies have settled, including Medtronic, the world's largest manufacturer of hospital-grade pulse oximeters. The company has started to label their products sold in California with a warning about possible inaccuracies for darker-skinned patients. But neither Medtronic nor the other manufacturers involved in the lawsuits would agree to talk to us. The companies that have not yet reached a settlement with Roots Community Health are scheduled to go to trial late this summer. Dr. Noha Abalata knows that her lawsuit against device manufacturers won't protect all of her patients, but it's a start.
There's no question in my mind that this has resulted in death and severe outcomes, particularly for people with darker skin tones. Everyone should be enraged about this. I don't want to pretend like this is something that's easy, that this is going to be an easy solution, but you're never going to find a solution if you don't care.
Next time on The Race Equation, we tell the story of the so-called black pill. How did a drug intended to treat heart failure get approved only for Black patients?
There had not ever before been a drug specifically for one race of people. It's almost like a religious belief. It's almost like a faith that race is a real biological distinction.
In no way did we say we were going to make a Black drug or something that was exclusively for Black patients. Nothing could be further from the truth.
The Race Equation is a special series from the New England Journal of Medicine. It's reported by me, Rachel Goppow. Our senior producer is Catherine Fenolosa. Our editor is Sarah Kate Kramer. Sound design by James Trout. Andrea Lopez Cruzado is our fact checker. We had help from Dr. Aaron Ball, Dr. Winfred Williams, Christine Gwynn, Adam Strauss, Allison Burke, and Leocadia Marchwinski. Funding for the series is provided by the Doris Duke Foundation, committed to building a creative, equitable, and sustainable future.